In the unforgiving heart of the Arizona Territory, a woman's compassion became an act of treason. She was Elara Vance, a healer, who had fled the suffocating grip of Boston society, seeking solitude in a land that promised freedom but delivered only brutal isolation. He was an Apache warrior, a specter of the savage world she'd been taught to fear, left for dead under the merciless sun. When she chose to save the life of her sworn enemy, she couldn't know she was rewriting the destiny of a people. She thought she was mending a broken body, but by dawn she would stand before a newly forged chief who would claim her life, her heart, and her future as his own. This is the story of how a single act of mercy ignited a war, a passion, and a legend. The year was 1878. The Arizona sky, a canvas of bruised purple and angry orange, promised a violence that matched the land itself. From the porch of her small, isolated cabin, nestled in the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains, Elara Vance watched the storm gather. She was a ghost here, a woman who had traded the gilded cage of Boston for a self-imposed exile built of adobe and silence. At 26, she should have been the wife of some portly industrialist, her days measured by tea services and society calls. Instead, they were measured by the sun's harsh journey across the sky and the scarce, precious drops of water she drew from her well. Her father, Dr. Alistair Vance, a man of science and quiet rebellion, had filled her head not with thoughts of marriage, but with anatomy botany and the precise art of healing. When he passed, leaving her to face the future, her overbearing uncle had arranged a marriage to the ambitious and chillingly possessive Marshal John Harding. She had fled. Using a small inheritance, she journeyed west to a plot of land her estranged prospector grandfather had left her, a place so remote no one would think to look for her. The first clap of thunder was a cannon shot that shook the very timbers of the cabin. Rain followed not the gentle showers of New England, but a furious driving deluge that turned the dusty arroyos into churning brown rivers. Elara secured the shutters, the scent of ozone and wet creosote filling her small home. For 2 days the storm raged, a primal scream that mirrored the loneliness in her own heart. On the 3rd morning, the world was washed clean. A fragile sun broke through the clouds, making every water droplet on the sagebrush glitter like a diamond. It was this deceptive beauty that called her out. Her medical supplies were precious, and the post-storm bloom was a rare opportunity to replenish her stock of herbs. With a leather satchel slung over her shoulder, she followed a game trail, her worn leather boots sinking slightly into the damp red earth. She was nearly a mile from her cabin, near a cluster of rust-colored boulders, when she smelled it. Beneath the clean scent of rain and earth was the coppery metallic tang of blood. Her hand instinctively went to the small pistol tucked into her waistband, a grim necessity in this land. She moved slowly, her senses on high alert. It could be a coyote, a mountain lion, or worse, a man. The source was hidden in a shallow washout, carved by the storm's fury. There, half submerged in muddy water and tangled in debris, was a man. He was Apache. The single feather tied in his long black hair, the buckskin leggings and the turquoise amulet around his neck were unmistakable. But it was the stillness of him that seized her breath. His skin, the color of rich earth, was marred by a sickly pallor. A dark, ragged gash ran across his ribs, the source of the blood that stained the water around him. Another wound, a brutal-looking puncture, was high on his shoulder. He was face down, and for a moment, Elara was certain he was dead. Every instinct, every warning from the freight drivers in Tombstone, every lurid tale told of Apache raids, screamed at her to turn back. Run. Forget what she saw. He was the enemy, a faceless savage from the stories used to frighten children and justify military forts. To help him was madness. To be found with him was a death sentence. But then, as a sliver of sunlight touched his back, she saw a faint, almost imperceptible tremor run through his muscles. A shudder. He was alive. The healer in her eclipsed the woman of fear. Dr. Vance had never taught her to ask a patient's creed or color before setting a bone or stitching a wound. Pain is a universal language, Elara, he used to say. And compassion is its only true answer. Her mind raced. Dragging him back to the cabin was impossible. He was powerfully built, and she was a woman of slender frame. Leaving him here meant he would die from the wound, the exposure, or the predators that would surely be drawn by the scent of blood. There was no choice. She would have to treat him here and pray. She knelt beside him in the mud, her skirt soaking up the cold water. With a strength born of desperation, she managed to roll him gently onto his back. His face, even slack with unconsciousness, was striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a proud, unyielding mouth. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps her own age. A deep gash on his forehead oozed blood, matting his dark hair. "All right, Alistair," she whispered to her father's ghost. "Let's see what we're working with." Her hands, surprisingly steady, began their work. She tore strips from her petticoat, using the cleaner cloth to wipe the mud from his wounds. The gash on his ribs was deep, dangerously close to his lung. The puncture in his shoulder looked like it came from an arrow, but the shaft was gone. It had been torn out, making the wound worse. This wasn't a battle injury. It was an ambush, an execution, left unfinished. She worked feverishly, her knowledge taking over. She packed the wounds with the astringent yarrow she carried for emergencies, the small leaves turning dark as they soaked up the blood. She bound his ribs tightly with more strips of cloth, her fingers brushing against the warm, solid muscle of his torso. As she tended to the gentry on his forehead, his eyes fluttered open. They were not the dull, unfocused eyes of a dying man. They were black, sharp, and blazing with a fierce, defiant light. For a heartbeat, they stared into each other. She saw shock pain and a raw, untamed pride. He saw. What did he see? A white woman, her face smudged with dirt, her hands covered in his blood, leaning over him, not with a weapon, but with a makeshift bandage. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony, and he tried to push himself up. "Stay still!" Elara commanded, her voice firmer than she felt. "You'll tear the wounds open." He didn't understand her words, but he understood the pressure of her hand on his uninjured shoulder. His gaze swept over the landscape, then back to her, a question burning in their depths. His lips parted, and a single guttural word escaped a language she didn't know. Then his strength failed him. His eyes rolled back, and he slipped once more into the black embrace of unconsciousness. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. He was alive, and he had seen her. The choice was no longer simply about mercy. It was about survival. Both of theirs. Leaving him now was a condemnation, not just from her conscience, but potentially from his people should they find him. Taking him with her was a risk beyond measure. She looked at the man, a warrior rendered helpless by betrayal, and at the vast, indifferent wilderness around them. She had come here seeking solitude, but for the first time, she had never felt more terrifyingly, irrevocably alone. With a deep breath that tasted of rain and fear, she made her decision. She would not let him die. She would get him to her cabin, and heaven help them both. The next few hours were a blur of desperate, muscle-shredding labor. Elara constructed a crude travois using 2 sturdy branches and her own shawl, a technique she'd read about in a surveyor's journal. Securing the unconscious warrior to it was a clumsy, grim affair. He was heavy a dead weight of muscle and bone, and more than once she nearly lost her footing in the slick mud. The mile-long trek back to her cabin was the hardest journey of her life. Every rustle in the brush was a rattlesnake or a stalking Apache. Every shadow was a threat. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them, and she could feel the heat rising from the man's body. Fever was setting in. By the time she dragged the travois over the threshold of her home, her body screamed in protest. She bolted the door, her lungs heaving, and slumped against it for a moment, the rough-hewn wood cool against her back. The silence of the cabin was now filled with the ragged, shallow breathing of the stranger on her floor. She moved him from the travois to her own narrow bed, the only one she had. Peeling away the damp, ruined buckskin was an act of clinical necessity that felt unnervingly intimate. His body was a tapestry of scars, old and new, a testament to a life of conflict she could barely imagine. But beneath the marks of violence, he was perfectly made, all lean lines and coiled strength. She forced the thought from her mind, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. This was a patient, nothing more. For 3 days the world shrank to the 4 walls of her cabin. The warrior, whose name she did not know, was lost in the inferno of a raging fever. He thrashed against her restraints, crying out in a language of nightmares and pain. He spoke of shadows and betrayal of a brother's treachery. Names tumbled from his lips in the throes of delirium, Taza spoken with a venom that chilled her, and Nakai with a tone of sorrowful reverence. Elara fought the fever with every tool in her arsenal. She bathed his burning skin with cool water, the steam rising from his body. She brewed a bitter tea from willow bark, forcing the liquid past his cracked lips a few drops at a time. She cleaned and redressed his wounds, marveling at the sheer resilience of his body. The gash on his ribs was deep and inflamed, and she feared infection would claim him. In those long, watchful hours, the lines between healer and patient, between white woman and Apache warrior, began to blur. She learned the map of his face, the way his brow furrowed in pain, the slight curl of his lip, even in unconsciousness, the sheer blackness of his lashes against his fever-flushed skin. She spoke to him, her voice a low, steady murmur, not because she thought he could understand, but because the silence was a crushing weight. She told him about Boston, about her father, about the scent of the sea filling the small cabin with the ghost of a life he could never know. On the 4th night, the fever broke. The crisis passed in a violent storm of shivers that shook the bed frame. Elara held him down, covering him with every blanket she owned, her own body aching with fatigue. As dawn painted the eastern window, with pale strokes of grey and rose, the shivering subsided. He fell into a deep, natural sleep, his breathing finally even and calm. His skin, once searing to the touch, was cool. Elara sat in a chair by the bed, her head bowed in exhaustion, and wept. They were tears of relief, of fear, of a profound and terrifying connection to the stranger in her bed. She had done it. She had pulled him back from the precipice. He woke late in the afternoon. She was grinding corn by the hearth when a soft sound made her turn. His eyes were open. The fire of the fever was gone, replaced by a clear, sharp intelligence that missed nothing. He watched her, his gaze taking in the small, tidy cabin, the drying herbs hanging from the rafters, the books stacked neatly on a crate, and finally her. He pushed himself up slowly, a hiss of pain escaping his lips as his bandaged ribs protested. Elara moved to the bedside, a cup of water in her hand. She said nothing, simply held it out to him. For a long moment he just looked at it, his eyes searching hers. The primal distrust was there, the ingrained caution of a man for whom strangers were threats. But there was something else, too. A flicker of memory of a woman's gentle hands and a soothing voice in the heart of a burning darkness. He reached out his hand, surprisingly steady, and took the cup. His fingers brushed against hers, a touch that sent an unexpected jolt through her. He drank deeply, then handed the cup back. His eyes held hers. "You," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp from disuse. The single English word was clear, an offering and a question all in one. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. He knew some English. She nodded a small, shy gesture. "Me. I am Ilara." He considered the name, testing its sound. Then he touched his own chest, his expression unyielding, proud. Kyle. Kyle. The name suited him. It was short, strong, like a stone. He looked down at the clean bandages on his ribs and shoulder, then back at her. The question was obvious. Why would one of his enemies save his life? Ilara struggled for an answer he might understand. "You were hurt," she said, simply gesturing to his wounds. "Dying. I am a healer." Kyle watched her, his perception far deeper than his limited English. He understood the word healer. He saw the truth of it in her steady hands, in the rows of dried plants, in the faint scent of poultices that clung to the air. But it wasn't a full explanation. Many could heal. Few would do it for an Apache they found bleeding in the dirt. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his jaw tight against the pain. He was weak, but the warrior's spirit within him refused to show it. He stood a bit unsteady and walked the few paces to the open doorway, gazing out at the land he knew so well. It was his land, yet he had been a guest in this stranger's home, a prisoner of his own broken body. He turned back to face her, his tall frame filling the small cabin. The power in him was palpable, a contained energy that made the air feel thick. "Why?" he asked again, the word more forceful this time. It was not just a question of her actions. It was a question of her heart. Ilara met his intense gaze, refusing to be intimidated. She thought of her father, of the principles he had instilled in her. "Where I come from," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "a life is a life. It is not my place to judge it, only to save it if I can." Kyle was silent for a long time, his dark eyes plumbing the depths of hers, searching for the lie, the trick, the hidden angle. He found none. He found only an unnerving sincerity, a strength that was not of the sword or the gun, but of conviction. He had been betrayed by his own blood, left to be food for crows. He had been saved by his enemy. The world had turned upside down. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was not an agreement, not precisely. It was an acknowledgement. A fragile, unspoken truce was forged in the quiet of that cabin. He was Kyle. She was Ilara, and they were bound together for now by a debt of life and a shared, dangerous solitude. The days that followed settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Kyle's strength returned with astonishing speed. The first day he could barely stand. By the third, he was pacing the confines of the small cabin like a caged panther, his movements regaining their fluid grace. His presence changed the very nature of Ilara's solitude. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a watchful, resonant energy. Communication was a clumsy dance of gestures, single words, and shared understanding. He pointed to the herbs hanging from the rafters, and she would say their names both in English and the Latin her father had taught her. He in turn would show her which ones his people used, crushing a leaf between his fingers and gesturing to his stomach for a stomach ailment, or to his head for a fever. He was a quick study, his mind sharp and absorbent. He picked up English words with an ease that surprised her, his pronunciation rough but his meaning clear. He watched her every move, not with suspicion anymore, but with a profound analytical curiosity. He watched her read her father's medical texts by candlelight, her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her cook their meager meals of corn cakes and dried beans, her movements efficient and practiced. He saw not a helpless, fragile woman, but a survivor as tough and resilient in her own way as any warrior he knew. One afternoon, Elara was mending her dress, her fingers nimble with the needle. Kyle sat across the small room, sharpening his knife on a wet stone. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound. "That mark," he said suddenly, his voice startling her. He gestured with his chin towards her wrist, where a faint, crescent-shaped scar resided. Elara paused, touching the old scar. "An accident. From my childhood in Boston. I fell on a broken bottle by the shipping docks." "Boston?" he repeated. "Far." He looked at her, then at the vast, sun-drenched landscape outside the door. "Why here?" It was the question she had been waiting for, the one that lay at the heart of her existence. She set her sewing aside, the weight of her past settling on her. "I did not fit." She began choosing her words carefully. "My life there was chosen for me. A husband I did not want. A world of small rooms and smaller ideas. I wanted more." She gestured vaguely at the mountains, the endless sky. This. Kyle understood. The desire for freedom was a language that needed no translation. His people fought and died for it. "The husband," he pressed his eyes, narrowing slightly. "He let you go." A humorless laugh escaped Elara's lips. "He did not have a choice. I left in the middle of the night. His name is John Harding. He is a U.S. Marshal now." The moment she said the name, she felt a chill as if the words themselves had summoned a cold wind. Kyle's hand stopped its movement on the whetstone. Marshal. He knew the word. A lawman. An enemy. He filed the name away, a piece of a puzzle he was slowly assembling. In return for her story, he offered a piece of his own. He spoke of his father Nakai, the chief of their band of the Chiricahua Apache. He described him as a man of wisdom, his strength failing with age. And he spoke again of Taza, his cousin. "Taza wants the power of chief," Kyle said, his voice low and hard. "My father sees the wisdom in peace, in finding a new way. Taza sees only the old way. War. Blood." He touched the bandage on his shoulder. "Taza said we would hunt. He led me to the canyon. His arrows were waiting." The betrayal was stark, brutal, and chillingly personal. Elara now understood the venom in his delirious whispers. He was not just a warrior ambushed by an enemy. He was a son, betrayed by his own kin, a prince left for dead in a struggle for a throne. As Kyle healed, he began to contribute. One morning, Elara found him by the door with 2 snared rabbits. He skinned them with an efficiency that was both brutal and beautiful, wasting nothing. He showed her how to use the sinew for thread, and how the bones could be sharpened into awls. He taught her how to read the tracks in the dirt outside her cabin to know what had passed in the night. He was teaching her how to see the world through his eyes, a world alive with signs and meanings she had never noticed before. A deep and powerful connection was growing between them, forged in the quiet intimacy of their shared seclusion. It was in the way he would watch her, a silent intensity in his gaze that made her skin prickle. It was in the way she would find herself glancing at him, admiring the powerful line of his jaw, or the way his long hair fell across his shoulders. It was a dangerous, unspoken thing, a spark in a tinder dry land. The outside world intruded on the 4th week. A dust cloud on the horizon, too uniform for cattle, too determined for a random rider. A patrol, or a posse. Kyle saw it first. He was on the small ridge behind the cabin, testing his strength when he spotted the riders. He moved with a swift, silent urgency, appearing at Ilara's door like a phantom. "Riders," he said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "5 of them. They ride here." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Ilara's heart. There was only one reason a posse would come to her remote cabin. They were looking for her. Or for him. "Inside," she commanded, her mind racing. "The root cellar." The cellar was small and dark, a space under the floorboards she used for storing preserves. It was a miserable hiding place, but it was the only one they had. Kyle slipped inside without a word, pulling the heavy wooden trapdoor down, leaving only a sliver of a gap to see through. Ilara kicked dirt over the edges of the door, then hastily threw a bearskin rug over it, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and sat down at her small table with a book, forcing her hands to be still. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, stopping just outside her door. A heavy fist hammered on the wood. "Miss Vance Ilara Vance, open this door in the name of the law." Ilara's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. She had heard it in Boston ballrooms and in her nightmares. With a sense of dread so profound, it felt like drowning. She stood up and walked to the door. She opened it to face the ghost she thought she had outrun. Marshal John Harding stood on her porch, flanked by 4 grim-faced deputies. He was just as she remembered, handsome, in a severe, clean-shaven way, his posture rigid with authority. But his eyes, the color of a winter sky, were harder now, and they burned with a possessive fire as they fell upon her. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low mixture of relief and accusation. "Thank God. I've been searching for you for months. We all thought you were dead." Marshal John Harding swept into Ilara's cabin as if he owned it, his silver badge glinting in the dusty sunlight. He moved with an air of proprietary right, his gaze cataloguing every detail of her Spartan existence: the rough-hewn furniture, the simple corn husk mattress in the corner, the drying herbs, his disapproval, a palpable force in the room. His deputies remained outside their presence, a silent, looming threat. "To think," Harding began, removing his leather gloves with a deliberate slowness, "that a woman of your breeding, of your delicate constitution, has been living in this." He gestured around the room, a faint sneer on his lips. "I should have known your father's romantic notions would infect you with this absurd fantasy of frontier life." "I am not a fantasy, John, and I am not delicate," Ilara replied, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. She was acutely aware of Cale's silent and hidden beneath the floorboards, a secret that could ignite this tinderbox. "I made a life for myself." "You made a hovel," he corrected his tone, softening into a patronizing concern that was far more infuriating than open anger. "Ilara, this foolishness is over. Your uncle is worried sick. I have come to take you home, back to civilization where you belong." "This is my home now," she said, standing her ground, "and I do not belong to you or anyone else." Harding's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, his height and bulk intentionally intimidating. "We will discuss your opinions on the journey back. For now, pack what you value." We rode for Tombstone within the hour. It was not a request, it was a command. His eyes continued their relentless scan of the room, and then they stopped. They fixed on the bed. Her bed. It was neatly made, but to a lawman's eye something was amiss. The indentation in the pillow was too deep, the blanket slightly disturbed, as if by a larger frame than hers. "You have a visitor?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I have been ill," Ilara lied, her mind racing. "A fever, I've been resting." Harding walked over to the bed, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He ran a hand over the blanket, then picked up the pillow. Beneath it lay a single, long strand of black hair. It was not hers. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, a dark accusation against the light from the window. "This is not the hair of a sick woman," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "This is the hair of an Indian." He turned on her, his handsome face twisted into a mask of fury and disgust. "Have they been here? Have they threatened you? By God, Ilara, if one of those savages has laid a hand on you, I will burn their entire nation to the ground." From beneath the floor, Cale heard every word. He heard the man's possessive tone, the contempt in his voice, and the threat against his people. His hand tightened on the hilt of his knife, his muscles coiling. It took every ounce of his discipline to remain still, to trust Ilara to handle the serpent in her house. Ilara's mind worked with the speed of desperation. The truth was impossible. A lie was their only hope. She had to make him believe a story that would send him away. She let a shudder run through her body, a performance of fear and vulnerability she despised but knew was necessary. "They came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Days ago. Just one of them. He was wounded. He stumbled in here during the storm." Harding's eyes blazed. "And what did he do?" He took some food and a bit of cloth for a bandage." She elaborated, weaving a plausible tale. "He was delirious with fever. He collapsed on the bed for a while. I was terrified. I locked myself in the pantry until he was gone." She pointed to the small pantry door, praying he wouldn't check the empty space. He left the next morning as soon as he could walk. He headed north towards the Galiuro Mountains. She pointed north in the opposite direction of Kyle's true stronghold. It was a gamble, a desperate misdirection. Harding studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. Her performance was flawless, the pale skin, the wide, fearful eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. It was the version of Ilara he expected, a damsel in distress, frightened by the very savages he was sworn to eradicate. The idea that she could have helped the warrior, tended to him, harbored him was so far outside his prejudiced worldview that he couldn't conceive of it. "He's lucky he didn't bleed out on your floor." Harding spat his fury, now directed at the phantom Apache. "The Galiuro Range, you say good. General Crook has patrols sweeping that area. With any luck, they'll find him and finish the job." He turned back to her, his tone shifting back to that of a rescuer. "You see, this proves my point. It is not safe for you here. You are a lamb in a den of wolves, Ilara." He reached out, intending to cup her face, but she flinched away. The movement was instinctive, a recoil from his touch, but to him it was a sign of trauma. "He didn't harm you, did he?" Harding asked, a new, darker suspicion in his eyes. "No," Ilara said quickly. "He was too weak. He just rested and left." "Good," Harding said, though he looked unconvinced. "We leave now. I'll have my men search the cabin and the immediate area for tracks, just to be sure he's long gone. Then you will come with me." Panic seized Ilara. A search would be disastrous. Cale's tracks were everywhere. They would find the makeshift travois, the bloodstains she couldn't wash away. "No," she said, a little too forcefully. She softened her tone. "Please, John, I am shaken. Can you not see that? To have strange men trampling through my home after what just happened. Just give me a day. Let me compose myself. I will pack my things. I will be ready to go in the morning. I promise." She was appealing to his vanity, to his desire to be seen as her protector, her gallant savior. She was playing the part of the woman he wanted her to be. Harding hesitated, his pride warring with his suspicion. He looked at her standing there, so seemingly fragile, and his ego won. She had agreed to go with him. That was the important thing. A single night would make no difference. "Very well," he conceded. "One night. But my men and I will make camp within shouting distance. We will not be far. And Elara." He added his voice, dropping to a stern whisper as he leaned in close. "Do not even think of doing something foolish again. Your running days are over." He turned and strode out of the cabin, shouting orders to his men to set up camp by the creek. Elara closed the door, her knees weak with relief. She leaned against the wood, her eyes closed, listening as the sounds of the deputies setting up their camp filled the air. She waited a full 10 minutes before she dared to move. Sliding the bearskin rug aside, she slowly lifted the trapdoor. Kyle emerged from the darkness, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He had heard everything. The lies she had spun, the promise she had made. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "You told him you would go." "I told him what he needed to hear, so he wouldn't find you and hang you from the nearest tree." She countered, her voice sharp with residual fear and adrenaline. "You are his woman," Kyle stated. It was not a question. It was a conclusion drawn from Harding's proprietary tone. "I am not," she snapped. "I ran 3,000 miles to get away from him. He is the past I fled." Kyle stepped closer, his presence commanding the small space between them. "He will not leave without you. In the morning he will take you." "Then we don't have until morning," Elara said, her mind already working, the fear hardening into resolve. "He thinks you went north. His men are camped by the creek to the west. The path to the east through the rocks is clear. You need to leave. Now, go back to your people." He stared at her, a strange emotion flickering in his eyes. He had come to her cabin a broken man, a warrior stripped of his strength. She had mended him. She had faced down his enemy and her own, and with a clever lie had saved him again. And now she was telling him to save himself, even though it meant leaving her to the mercy of the marshal. "You would stay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "With him, I will handle John Harding," she said, though she had no idea how. "Just go, Kyle, before they find you." He did not move. He looked from her determined face to the bolted door, and then back again. Leaving her here with the man who called her his property felt like a deeper betrayal than the one Taza had committed. It was a violation of the debt he owed her, a debt that went far beyond the mending of his wounds. "No," Kyle said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You saved my life. Now I will save yours. He will not take you. We live together. Tonight." Kyle's decision hung in the air, as final and immovable as the mountains themselves. The idea was madness, fleeing with an Apache warrior becoming a fugitive from a U.S. Marshal. It was a step from which there was no return. But looking at John Harding's campfires, flickering through the window, a constellation of menace in the encroaching dusk, Elara knew Cale was right. Harding would never let her go. Her life of quiet solitude was over. Her only choice was what came next, a return to a gilded cage or a plunge into an unknown, perilous freedom. "How?" She whispered, the reality of their situation crashing down on her. "His men are everywhere. They watch the cabin." Kyle explained, his voice a low, confident murmur. "They do not watch the earth beneath it. Your root cellar. Is there another way out?" Elara's eyes widened. "No, but it backs against the foundation stones. My grandfather wrote in his journal that he always meant to dig a ventilation shaft to the ravine behind the house, but never finished." It was a sliver of a chance. While Elara packed a small satchel with her most valuable possessions, her father's medical journal, a pouch of gold coins, flint and steel, and as many medical supplies as she could carry, Kyle worked. Using his knife and a rusted shovel head he found in the cellar, he began to attack the mortar and packed earth between the foundation stones. The work was slow and agonizingly quiet. Every scrape of metal on stone sounded like a gunshot in the charged silence. Above them, they could hear the occasional crunch of a deputy's boots making rounds. Hours passed. The moon rose high in the sky, bathing the landscape in an ethereal silver light. Ilara's cabin from the outside looked perfectly still, its lone inhabitant presumably asleep. Finally, with a soft crumble of dirt, a stone gave way. A rush of cool night air smelling of pine and dust filled the cramped cellar. They had an opening barely large enough to crawl through, leading directly into the deep, shadow-choked ravine behind the cabin. Kyle went first, melting into the darkness like a creature born of it. He scouted the area, ensuring no guards had been posted on the ridge. He returned a few moments later, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows, and helped Ilara through the narrow gap. As she stood and brushed the dirt from her dress, Ilara took one last look at the small adobe cabin. It had been her sanctuary, her fortress of solitude. Now it was just a shell she was leaving behind. She was truly untethered, a ship cut from its last mooring. Kyle took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We move now." No sound. What followed was a masterclass in stealth. Kyle led her through the treacherous terrain of the Dragoon Mountains, a place his people called home and white men called a fortress. He moved with an uncanny silence, his feet seeming to know the placement of every loose rock and dry twig. Ilara, guided by his hand, did her best to emulate him, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. They did not walk. They flowed through the landscape, using the deep shadows cast by the moonlight, their path winding and indirect to conceal their tracks. They journeyed through the night, stopping only for brief moments, for Kyle to listen to the sounds of the wilderness to ensure they were not followed. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern peaks, they had put miles between themselves and Harding's posse. They took shelter in a small hidden cave, screened by a curtain of ancient junipers. Exhaustion hit Ilara like a physical blow. Kyle handed her a piece of dried meat and a canteen of water. "He will follow," Kyle said, his gaze fixed on the direction from which they had come. "He will find the tunnel. He will come with rage. He will assume you took me by force," Ilara said, the bitter irony not lost on her. "He will see himself as a rescuer, not a pursuer." "It does not matter what he sees," Kyle replied. "It only matters that we reach the stronghold before he finds us." The stronghold. He spoke the word with a reverence that told her it was more than just a place. It was the heart of his people, their sanctuary. For 2 more days they traveled their journey, a blur of exhaustion and endurance. Kyle pushed them hard, but he was not unkind. He found water in places that looked barren, identified edible roots she had never known, and at night he would take the longer watch, allowing her to get the deeper rest. The unspoken bond between them deepened with every shared mile, with every silent glance of mutual reliance. Ilara, the Boston-bred intellectual, found a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. The wilderness was no longer just a landscape. It was a living entity, and with Kyle as her guide, she was learning its language. Late on the 3rd day, they crested a high ridge. Below them, hidden in a wide protected canyon, was Cale's home. The stronghold, the village, was not the crude collection of tents she might have imagined. It was a sprawling semi-permanent settlement of wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings, made of brush and hide, nestled along a stream that snaked through the canyon floor. The air was filled with the smell of wood smoke, the sounds of children laughing, and the low murmur of a community. But as they descended the trail into the canyon, a hush fell over the village. People emerged from their homes, their faces turning towards the newcomers. Their expressions were not welcoming. They were hard suspicious and filled with a cold hostility as their eyes fell on Ilara. They saw a white woman, the symbol of their enemy, of the people who were relentlessly hunting them and stealing their land. A warrior, powerfully built, and with a cruel slash of a mouth, stepped forward. His eyes, small and black, were filled with malice as he looked at Kyle. "My cousin," the man sneered. "We thought the buzzards had picked your bones clean. And look what you have brought back with you. A pet." Kyle's hand dropped to his knife, his body tensing. "Taza," he said the name of a cold weight in the air. "I have returned." Taza's gaze swept over Kyle's still bandaged ribs, a flicker of angry disappointment in his eyes. His ambush had failed. He then turned his full venomous attention to Ilara. "You bring this thing into our home. Have you lost your mind? She is under my protection." Kyle stated his voice, ringing with authority. He stepped slightly in front of Ilara, a clear shield. "She saved my life when you left me to die." A murmur went through the crowd. The accusation was public, a direct challenge. From the largest wickiup near the center of the camp, an old man emerged, leaning heavily on the arm of a serene-looking woman with long grey braids. The man was frail, his skin like wrinkled parchment, but his eyes, though clouded with age, held the unmistakable spark of command. This was Chief Nakai. His gaze fell upon his son, and a flicker of relief crossed his face. Then he saw Ilara, and his expression hardened into a mask of weary sorrow. "My son," Nakai said, his voice weak but clear, "you have brought the enemy into our sacred place. Explain this." All eyes were on Kale. He stood before his father, his people, and his treacherous cousin, with a white woman at his side. He had survived betrayal and a desperate flight only to arrive at a trial. His homecoming was not a celebration. It was a confrontation that would decide not only his own fate, but the fate of the woman who had saved him. The air in the stronghold was thick with judgment. Ilara stood beside Kale, feeling the weight of 100 hostile stares. She was a symbol of the world that had brought nothing but pain to these people. Taza, Kyle's treacherous cousin, stood before the elders, his voice a venomous roar. "He brings a white-eye witch among us. She has poisoned his mind. While our great chief Nakai weakens, his son brings the enemy to our door." Kyle let the accusations settle before he spoke, his voice calm but sharp as flint. "This woman is named Ilara. She saved my life when Taza's assassins left me for dead." He pulled aside his bandage to reveal the healing gash. "This is the wound Taza's ambition gave me, and this," he gestured to his heart, "is the life Ilara's honor gave back." The accusation hung in the air, a direct challenge. Before the elders could deliberate, Chief Nakai, who had been watching in grim silence, was seized by a violent, body-racking cough. He clutched his chest, his breath failing him. Kyle rushed to his side, but it was too late. With a final shuddering gasp, the great chief's life came to an end. A cry of grief went up, but Taza seized the moment of chaos. "Our chief has joined the spirits," he bellowed. "A new chief must lead us with strength and vengeance. I, Taza, claim the leadership of these people." "You will not disgrace my father's memory." Kale's voice cut through the turmoil, cold with fury. "If a chief is to be chosen, it will be by the old way, by the fire of the fathers." The ancient trial was decreed. It was not a simple duel, but a test of spirit. At sunset, The two challengers would enter the mountains with only a knife, tasked to return by dawn, with a symbol of their worthiness to lead. The night was an agony of waiting for Ilara. As dawn broke, Taza strode triumphantly back into the camp. He carried the massive body of a freshly killed mountain lion, which he threw down before the elders. "I bring the symbol of strength," he proclaimed, "the heart of a predator. As this lion was king of the mountain, so shall I be the leader of the people." The crowd roared, impressed by the show of force. Taza smiled, certain of his victory. But then another figure appeared on the high trail. It was Kale. He carried no trophy. His hands were empty. A disappointed murmur rippled through the people. He walked to the center of the clearing. "I bring no symbol of death," Kyle said, his voice ringing with authority. "I bring a symbol of life." He pointed to the highest, sheerest cliff face overlooking the canyon. There, on a sacred, inaccessible ledge, a small fire was burning its smoke, a prayer curling into the morning sky. "That is the fire of the fathers," Kyle announced to the stunned tribe. "The sacred flame dormant for a generation. I did not spend the night hunting a beast. I spent it climbing the sheer rock just as our ancestors did, to bring back the light for our people." The rekindled flame was a far more powerful symbol than a dead animal. It spoke of devotion, hope, and a connection to their past. "And I didn't come back empty-handed," Kyle continued. He held up a single, oddly crafted arrowhead. "I found this on the sacred ledge. It is your mark, Taza. Grey flint from the San Pedro River. You left proof of your betrayal at our most sacred place." The truth was undeniable. The people turned on Taza, their awe for Kyle, mixing with contempt for the traitor. The eldest council member rose. "Kyle," he declared, "you have the wisdom of Nakai. You have rekindled the sacred flame. You are our chief." By dawn, Kale stood as their leader. His first act was swift. "Taza," he commanded, "you are banished. If you are ever seen in these lands again, you will be hunted down." With the traitor exiled, Kyle turned. He walked through his people, who parted before him with reverence, and stopped directly in front of Ilara. The entire tribe watched. Ilara Vance. He began his voice, now formal, yet deeply personal. He spoke first in Apache, his words flowing with a poetry she couldn't understand, but a meaning she could feel. Then he switched to English, his words for her alone. "A life debt is a sacred bond. You saved my life, and I have saved yours. But that is not enough. You are my Izanla, my guiding light." He took her hand, his touch sending a shockwave through her. "Therefore," Kyle declared, his voice rising so all could hear, "as my first act as chief, I claim Ilara Vance not as a captive, but as the woman of the chief. She will have my protection, a place of honor, and she will be my wife. Her heart will be my heart, from this day until the mountains turn to dust." He had not asked. He had claimed her. Yet in his eyes she saw not possession, but a devotion so absolute it stole her breath. Before she could answer, a frantic shout came from the canyon's lookout. "Riders, soldiers are coming!" The tender moment shattered. Marshal John Harding, his face a mask of rage, rode into the clearing at the head of a full company of U.S. cavalry. He saw Ilara standing beside Kale, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. And the sight broke him. "Ilara!" he roared, dismounting. "Step away from that savage. I'm here to rescue you." "I do not need rescuing, John," Ilara called back, her voice unwavering. "I am where I choose to be." "He has brainwashed you," Harding screamed, drawing his pistol. "I am a U.S. Marshal. I am taking you back, and I am taking him in for kidnapping." He aimed the pistol directly at Cale's heart. Cale stood his ground, a shield for his people, but in that split second, Ilara acted. As Harding's finger tightened on the trigger, she lunged, grabbing a heavy ceremonial shield and shoving herself in front of Cale. The gun fired. The bullet meant for the new chief slammed into the buffalo hide shield. The force threw Ilara back into Cale's arms, but she was unharmed. The selfless act stunned everyone, Apache and soldier alike, into silence. A white woman had taken a bullet for an Apache chief. The cavalry captain, a professional soldier named Miller, had seen enough. "Marshal, stand down," he commanded. "This is not a rescue. We are not starting a war over your personal obsession. She belongs to me." Harding raved, but his authority was gone. Captain Miller gave the order to withdraw, leaving Harding alone and exposed. Before the disgraced marshal could react, Kyle's warriors seized him. Kyle looked down at the defeated man, then at Ilara, who stood beside him, her eyes shining with love and defiance. "Take him to the edge of our lands," Kyle commanded. "Leave him with a canteen and a knife. Let the desert pass its judgment." As Harding was dragged away, Kyle turned back to Ilara. The tribe now watched with awe and acceptance. She was one of them. He cupped her face in his hands. "You shielded my body," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you have held my heart since the moment I opened my eyes and saw you. And you have held mine," she replied. There in the heart of the stronghold, surrounded by his people, Chief Kyle lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss that sealed their promise, bridged their two worlds, and began the legend of a chief and his queen, bound forever by a love as fierce and enduring as the land itself. And so, the story of Ilara Vance and Chief Cale became a whisper on the wind, a tale told around campfires of how a single act of compassion can reroute the river of destiny. Theirs was not a simple love story. It was the violent, beautiful forging of a new world, a testament to the fact that the deepest divides can be bridged by courage, and the most unlikely hearts can find a shared home. They faced hardship, war, and the relentless march of change, but they faced it together, their bond, a shield against a hostile world. Their legacy wasn't written in history books, but in the survival of their people and the enduring power of a love that dared to defy an entire era. If their incredible journey moved, you please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with others who appreciate tales of courage and unlikely love. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories from the pages of history. Your support allows us to keep these amazing legacies alive. Thank you for listening.